and I want to congratulate you, Mrs. Clayton, for having organized this special order. Let me begin my remarks by quoting a very profound proverb that the gentlelady from Florida just mentioned a few moments ago, and that is an African proverb which says, quote, "It takes an entire village to raise a child." And that is a very beautiful statement. And what that means is, in a certain sense, we are all responsible for everyone else. And that if we turn our backs on children who are hungry, who are living out on the street, then we are causing and are part of that problem. And that we must take responsibility for all the people in our country in order to make this, once again, a great nation. Madam Speaker, we are all concerned about the budget deficit, but I think we are even more concerned about the national disgrace that has the United States of America leading the entire industrialized world by double in terms of the rate of poverty amongst our children. 22% of our children are today living in poverty, which is the highest rate by double in the entire industrialized world. I think that as Americans, we are not satisfied. We cannot accept that 5 million children today are hungry, that hundreds of thousands of our children are sleeping out on the street, that 10 million children lack access to health care, and that many millions more are unable to receive the help they need to deal with the horrors of child abuse. Further, we are concerned that many of the low-income communities in this country, with very high unemployment rates, are unable to deal with the enormous problems in terms of illiteracy, homelessness, unemployment that their communities face. And that is why we gather today to speak in favor of the Children's Initiative and in favor of the empowerment zones. And as part of the Children's Initiative, we are speaking for the Children's Immunization Program. What does it say about the United States of America when 45% of our kids in 1991 were not fully immunized? And that figure is below what exists in many third world countries. And the money that we are asking for in terms of what the House passed would cover immunization programs for 11 million children. What does it say about America when millions of kids are getting diseases today which are easily avoidable? What does that say? And we are here today as a group to speak in favor of the Family Preservation Act. And in my own state of Vermont, we have very serious problems regarding child abuse, child neglect, and our public agencies and our private children's preservation agencies are stretched to the limit, so that you have families which are falling apart, families which cannot cope with the problems of child abuse, and yet the public and private agencies do not have the funds to hire the social workers to provide the programs to help these kids. We must pass the Family Preservation Act. And I think we also speak in favor of the House provision for a $7 billion expansion in the food stamp program, so that once and for all we can begin to move forward to eliminate hunger in the United States of America. And this, fellow Americans, is not a black problem, it is not a Hispanic problem, it is not a white problem, not a Native American problem, it is an American problem. In my home city of Burlington, Vermont, the private food shelters, private food banks are being overwhelmed by people, by families, by children who today do not have enough food to take care of their basic existence. You know, sometimes, Madam Chairwoman, we begin to take for granted. One of, I think, the problems of human nature is that when we see things in front of us day after day, we begin to say, well, that's normal. You know, I just stepped over 3 bodies to get in here of people who are sleeping out on the street. Well, no problem. There are 2 million homeless people in America. That's the way it is. So what? There are 5 million children in America who are hungry. So what? There is widespread hunger in our country. That's the way it is. Well, I think we have got to take a deep step backward, re-examine our priorities, and try to redetermine what this country is supposed to be about. In this country, children and adults are not supposed to be hungry. That is not what this country is about. That's not what people have fought wars for. And I think clearly that the expansion of the food stamp program will not solve all of the problems. But at the very least, this United States Congress must go on record as saying we are going to eliminate hunger in America. Everybody is at least entitled to that. And Madam Chair, we speak today in full support of the $28 billion expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit that was passed by the House. Today, the gap between the rich and the poor in America is wider than in any other industrialized nation on earth, and the working poor have seen a significant decline in their standard of living during the last 20 years. Now, we're not talking about people on welfare. We're not here talking about people who are unemployed. We are talking about millions and millions of working people in this country who are working for $4.25 an hour. And by the way, I think we've got to raise the minimum wage significantly. They're working for $5 an hour. They're working 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, and 60 hours a week. And you know what? At the end of that week, they're still in poverty. And the Earned Income Tax Credit begins to recognize that if you work in this country, you've got to live an existence above poverty, and it will provide a tax refund to those workers. And it is a very important program, and we've got to support it. Now, I want to say a word that I don't know that has been touched upon earlier, and that is people may say, people in the viewing audience may say, well, that sounds good, good idea, but how are we going to afford that? That costs so much money. And it seems to me that we can afford it if we begin to deal with some of the economic realities of America today. And that is, Madam Chair, that the wealthiest 1% of our population owns 37% of the wealth of America. That is significantly more than the bottom 90% of Americans own. And as I indicated earlier, the gap between the rich and poor is wider than in any other country on earth. And therefore, we have to ask some deep moral questions. Is it appropriate for the wealthiest 1% to own more than the bottom 90%? Is it appropriate that during the 80s, the richest 1% saw an almost doubling in their real income at the same time as people began to sleep out on the streets and people began to go hungry? That is a moral question. And I think there is no question but that if we developed a progressive approach to funding these programs, we can do that without hurting the middle class or the working class. We're not asking middle income and working people to help the poor. What's happened during the 80s is the rich got much richer, their taxes went down. If we raise, as President Clinton had asked, the corporate income tax alone to 36%, that brings in, if my memory is correct, $17 billion of additional revenue. That is what the President initially asked. We only passed it at 35%. The Senate is at 35%. I think it is not inappropriate to ask the wealthiest people in this country to pay more than President Clinton has asked. He has come forward with a progressive program. We should do better. There are ways to bring in this revenue which do not impact on the middle income and working people. So let me simply conclude by mentioning to you, Madam Chair, that 52 members of the House, in a letter sponsored by the Progressive Caucus, have urged Chairman Szabo and Chairman Rostenkowski to fight to retain the Children's Initiative, to protect what we did in Medicare against what the Senate did, and not to give in to the Senate demands. So ultimately, my hope is that out of this reconciliation package will come a strong step forward to protect working people and the children of this country. We can do no less. And thank you very much.
I want to thank the gentleman.